The great fish moved silently through the night water, propelled by short sweeps of its crescent tail. The mouth was open just enough to permit a rush of water over the gills. There was little other motion, an occasional correction of the apparently aimless course by the slight raising or lowering of a pectoral fin. The eyes were sightless in the black, and the other senses transmitted nothing extraordinary to the small, primitive brain. The fish might have been asleep, save for the movement dictated by countless millions of years of instinctive continuity. Lacking the flotation bladder common to other fish and the fluttering flaps to push oxygen-bearing water through its gills, it survived only by moving. Once stopped, it would sink to the bottom and die of anoxia. This is the opening of Peter Benchley's 1973 book Jaws, and as I read it, I was struck by its neutral tone and scientific details. For me, reading the book after seeing the film highlighted the complexity of our engagement with sharks, engagement which is rare and fleeting when it does occur, yet these creatures loom so large in our imaginations, in large part due to Benchley's work, and Spielberg's, that we encounter them exponentially more often in our media than we do in real life. I expected to find the animal demonized here, but the combination of science, advocacy, and mythos produces something much more compelling. 40 years since the film Jaws terrified viewers with its animal become monster, much has changed in the world of shark conservation. In 2 articles, Patrick Nason describes the evolution of what he terms shark culture, from fear to advocacy since the 1970s, and the interplay of the two where sharks are concerned. He centers his analysis of human attitudes toward sharks through Bruce, the now-lost animatronic shark who played the antagonist of Jaws. I cannot let that pass without bringing up his descendant, Bruce, the vegetarian great white in Finding Nemo. In some ways, Nason is on point. As oceans deteriorate and generations of American voters grow weary of watching as environmental conditions worsen while their leaders do nothing, empathy is on the rise for the powerful predators of the world's waters. This has manifested in ecotourism, such as swimming with sharks, and in media, as with the unflagging popularity of Shark Week, both of which rhetorically mix facts and mythos to reach their audience. Shark culture has not fully come around to advocacy. Sharks are hunted, culled, and killed as bycatch, their ecosystems some of the most threatened on the planet, and they're still starring in our nightmares through on-screen representations like The Shallows, 47 Meters Down, and The Meg. Film is not the only industry that has capitalized on the popularity of the shark as monster. Video games have had a similar, if lesser-known, trajectory with shark culture that stems from the same root in the Jaws franchise. After the release of Jaws and its sequels, Atlas released Jaws: The Revenge for NES in 1987. Jaws the computer game came out in 1989, and Jaws Unleashed debuted from Appaloosa Interactive in 2006 on PS2, which repositioned players not as humans fighting for their lives, but as the sharks themselves. This is some gameplay from the 1987 Jaws: The Revenge game, where you play as a diver, and your job is to go and shoot all of the sea creatures, jellyfish, stingrays, and you're trying to collect starfish and shells and avoid Jaws, which comes out in different sizes and chases you around, tries to prevent you from collecting your resources. If Jaws hits you, you lose a life. And if you kill Jaws, then you get a bonus level. Positioning the shark as antagonist, or even villain, doesn't change much when the player shifts into the role of the shark. In order to sell, games require novelty and must be fun to play, even the serious ones. And these games, the Jaws games, were commercially viable, if not necessarily successful, by leveraging gamers' devilish glee at becoming the monster. Opportunities in games to experience being as animal are fairly uncommon. Most of them tend toward the kind of bloody power fantasies we expect from video games culture. Exemplifying this trend are 2 more recent games from the same developer, Depth and Maneater, in which players take on the roles of sharks. The first, in a first-person shooter style, enacting the destruction of a team of divers raiding a shipwreck, and the second in what developers are calling a Shark PG, play on RPG role-playing game. Maneater has not been released, but suspicion reigns that it will draw on little of the nuanced storytelling and moving character development we find in excellent RPGs, but will rather be a mindless and bloody romp through a variety of waterscapes. So right now we're watching footage from the Depth game from the diver's perspective. In a minute we'll switch to the shark's perspective.
Nice. Oh yeah, look.
Oh, we're going into the water.
Oh.
Adam, I see some tasty morsels.
I do too.
Yeah.
You don't see anything. You don't see anything. You see nothing.
All right, guys, let's do this. Get
All right.
the treasure, don't die.
Wow.
Roger that. Oh,
Adam,
God.
this is
Dangerous job that someone's got to do.
this is awesome.
Oh God, it's like a sunken. Oh,
This is
shit.
especially
Oh,
dark.
God.
This is especially dark.
It's cool. When we level up, I'll get
All right,
flares.
focus on the treasure, guys.
You guys are so...
Wait, like, guys, I was making it automatically last time. I had tons of money, but I didn't press
Guys,
E once.
they're coming. They're coming.
Oh,
Oh,
guys.
I hear them.
Guys. Oh,
Where
guys.
are they?
Whoa.
Panic. Everyone panic.
Hell, don't panic. You
Adam.
panic and you die.
Panic.
Yeah.
I'm fucking panicking.
No, it's too dark.
It is
Adam,
really dark
try.
here. Holy fuck.
Oh, Adam.
I want my mommy.
Adam, let's get ready.
Oh,
Fucking shit! Yum
Yeah!
Oh, stab his teeth! Stab his stupid teeth! Oh, we got him!
Woohoo!
yeah, see, it's just us.
Dude, it's so
Adam,
dark
did
in
you
this
live? We
outfit.
lived, Adam, we lived!
It is really dark compared to the other ones.
These are bloody power fantasies. Maneater focuses mostly on optimizing the shark as a killing machine, but Depth derives its fun from the challenge of player versus player combat, strategizing and collaborating to attain victory. Depth also had the strange effect of encouraging players to think like a shark, as one reviewer pointed out. Players utilize the three-dimensional space differently based on their team. Play as shark in the game feels distinctly different from play as human. Colin Kremen discusses the concept of becoming animal in video games in his essay Molecular Mario, Becoming Animal in Compositions of Video Games, saying, "There are an infinite number of compositions we can form, a becoming wolf, a becoming whale, a becoming writer, poet, or gamer, as well as Mario, Sonic, Master Chief, and so on. The player does not become Mario, he or she enters into an affective relation to the molar representational Mario to produce a molecular Mario that affects every aspect of play. The lines separating or striating digital and material worlds dissolve in a becoming animal." End quote. Games can present provocative situations to their players that involve them entering into the life, story, and often the digital body of another. Game scholars often imagine that through play, the player becomes hybrid, a half-digital cyborg experiencing both their physical and in-game realities simultaneously, or even tuning out the physical in the immersion of play. Yet there is no denying the prominence or even dominance of the player in the equation, especially where animals are concerned. In his chapter on representation and discrimination in the book Role-Playing Game Studies, Aaron Trammell explains that rules in games often implement race as a category, defined by specific mechanics and abilities that risk essentializing racial experiences. He describes the messiness of encouraging players to empathetically imagine another person's experience through play, since a lack of understanding of the experiences of others can lead to flattening or stereotyping. Tabletop role-playing game players in games such as Dungeons & Dragons sometimes note this when people gender bend. They play a gender orientation or sexuality different from their own. Surveys of players and several studies in other parts of the book, Role-Playing Game Studies, indicate that in pursuing the freedom of escapism that games can offer, players sometimes revert to stereotype in their roleplay, which can be more damaging than helpful and can reach beyond themselves to the players at the table, the game master, and can embed themselves as confirmation of harmful assumptions about gender. One study suggests that players gender bending will perform their sexuality more flagrantly and promiscuously than if they were playing a character of their own gender. It's not much of a stretch to think that putting players in the role of an animal is not enough to encourage empathy or educate players. This seems like a very real danger watching the trailer for the Shark PG Maneater.
Close your eyes and imagine a place where the sun is bright and the beaches are wide. A place filled with southern charm, where the water is as warm as the welcome. So come feel the wind in your sails. kick back and relax. Enjoy the local cuisine. Your dream vacation is waiting for you here on the Gulf Coast. Go to maneatergame.com now to book your vacation. Operators are standing by.
In my disappointment that Maneater would not be a Shelter-like exploration of the lives of sharks, Shelter 1 and 2 being excellent examples of play as animal, I recalled that video games are not the only type of game to delve into the idea of shark being through playing. 2 tabletop RPGs offer players the possibility to become were-sharks. Admittedly, this is nowhere near the same thing as playing a shark as animal, but were creatures in folklore and media have often sought to represent and grapple with the human as animal, our tendency toward violence, struggle for survival, and capacity to reconcile our many inner natures into creatures that, while flawed, nonetheless fundamentally strive for good. Thus, I turned to investigate the ability of a tabletop role-playing game, or TRPG, to represent shark being with more complexity. The first example of were-sharks in TRPGs is one I will not spend much time on. Dungeons & Dragons provides players with a number of playable shapeshifter options, from the familiar werewolf to the more exotic were-raven, were-tiger, and were-shark. Aside from racial features associated with their respective animal kin, these racial options offer little in the way of compelling gameplay. Unless they are helmed by experienced players serious about exploring their potential complexities in a group of fellow players and under a game master willing to let them do so, they will be undiscernible from any other race option, barring rare circumstances. Therein lies the rub of any TRPG. So much depends upon the people at the table. That said, D&D settings include numerous aquatic monsters, so many and so varied that one shark can pose little threat by comparison. Rendered less than monstrous by comparison to these other magical creatures, the shark stands a better chance of being role-played empathetically. Ocean-centered TRPGs are few and tend to focus on surface adventuring, the perils of the deep rising up to challenge land-based characters. But in White Wolf's World of Darkness, players can explore sea and islandscapes as the were-shark race Rokia, and can fight to change the fate of the world's oceans. They call the land Unsea and the sky Oversea, and refer to land-based creatures as Dirtwalkers. Playing Rokia recenters players and embeds them in the environmental conflicts of human impact on aquatic landscapes. The major enemy of the Rokia, the Kraken goddess Quirrell, seeks the destruction of the sun by atomic force, death by fire, which the Rokia must fight to prevent. Rokia are more than just another power fantasy enacted through play, at least potentially. At their core, they are presented as environmental justice warriors, protectors of the oceans, and enemies of petrocultures, exploitative fisheries, and ocean polluters. Playing them demands players consider how to approach play as animal, experiencing the animal perspective of destructive human activities and human complacency in maintaining the status quo, and to explore shark being specifically through the active performance of play. These skin changers are the embodiment of human longing for union with our animal nature and provide the opportunity for open-ended storytelling that can be found in no other medium. They also provide an outlet for facing our fears about climate change as an impending apocalypse, as well as our more basic fear of sharks, by becoming one. Rokia are not perfect. They can go from calm and collected to ferocious and brutal, much like their animal counterparts, at least as viewed from a human perspective, and the game is, of course, composed by humans. The game's flavor text explains that, like other changers in the setting, half of the Rokia are born from shark mothers and half from human ones, but unlike other changer races, Rokia actively hunt and murder their human-born, out of rage at the treatment of their seas and distrust that humans can ever do the right thing or share values with them. This complexity is an excellent departure point for role-playing as a Rokia character. Players might struggle with inner conflict and conflict with others at the table as they go about protecting the Earth's oceans by killing their closest kin. But it could just as easily dissolve into an easy binary of kill human on sight without really considering the ethics of the situation. Most TRPG players, after all, are seeking an escape from their everyday lives with our complicated ethical questions and may resort to a kind of ecotourism of shallow inhabitants of a sharkish being. TRPGs depend so much upon who is at the table, and the extension of this project is going to be a bit of social science, investigating with role players, surveying them, sitting with them, examining my own group of players and those close to me in my community to figure out to what extent shark being or play as animal is possible in a game like this. And if it isn't as possible as we would like, to try to improve on that somehow and find a solution to or an alternative kind of TRPG experience that would offer something more to players, something closer to what we as ecomedia scholars would want to see. I will leave you with the immortal words of Captain Jack Sparrow on this. It came up in my thinking as I was thinking about this project, and I kind of wanted to include it here at the end, so here you go.
We could serve up as nice as a souvenir.
Still thinking of running, Jack? Think you can outrun the world? You know, the problem with being the last of anything, by and by there'll be none left at all.
Sometimes things come back, mate. We live in proof, you and me.
Aye, but that's a gamble of long odds, ain't it? There's never a guarantee of coming back. But passing on, that's dead certain.
Summoning the Brethren Court, then, is it?
It's our only hope, lad.
That's a sad commentary in and of itself.
The world used to be a bigger place.
The world's still the same. It's just less in it.